Welcome to Brands Saving the Planet. I'm Kelly Rogan, and this is the podcast where we talk to startup founders working to make this world a better place, to learn from their journey and help you grow your own impact startup. All right. Well, welcome, Ashlee. Excited to have you back on the podcast. But I wanted to kind of start off and kind of hand it over to you with an introduction into kind of who you are, your journey, and really what you're passionate about.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So I am Ashlee Sang. I run Ashlee Sang Consulting, and I do brand messaging strategy and marketing consulting for visionary founders, people who have lots of big ideas, people who want to make an impact in the world, and sometimes they just don't know where to start, or they just don't know how to take everything that's in their head and heart and actually communicate it to the people that they're trying to serve. And I'm definitely one of those accidental entrepreneurs. I got my start in international development in Senegal and West Africa. And that's where I really cut my teeth on all kinds of communications work. And I discovered the freelance sort of world as we were waiting for my husband's green card. And it all just sort of evolved from there. I also, at the same time as I was learning about freelancing, I was learning about conscious consumerism. So that was my entry into the social impact world, into this idea of business for good, into this idea of voting with our dollars. I had no idea that existed. I just went to, the closest store, or whatever was most convenient or whatever else. And then once I found out that, whoa, the purchases we make actually have an impact, I just couldn't get out of that rabbit hole. So when I took my business full time 3 years ago now, I really wanted to double down on that and grow these businesses from the inside out, because that is so much more impactful than me as a single consumer. I'm just a drop in the bucket. But if I can have that vicarious impact by working with these really visionary brands and founders, then that is what I'm after.
Absolutely. And it's kind of that idea that, when you walk into the office, which is now virtual, right? Where there is no actually walking to office for some people, but, you can't just put on this new mask. It's like, I think we're all kind of waking up to say, how can we really live aligned? Whether it's our relationships, our, work, our home life, where we live, what we buy, everything, how can that all align with what we care about? So, I'd love to kind of see if you could walk us through, when you do talk to someone, because there's a lot of listeners, a lot of people in the community that really are just starting on this journey of kind of saying, okay, this is something I'm really passionate about in my personal life. I'm trying to live, maybe it's more zero waste or trying to just make more conscious purchases. But how can I now apply that to my career, of then really where the funds are to actually make these conscious purchases? Can it come from, a source that I'm proud of, right? So what's kind of the first step that you advise for people who are starting on this journey?
Yeah, for both individuals and brands, I would start with your values. So really figuring out, what is it that you care about most? I have this philosophy for brands and founders of standing up for your values in order to stand out. And I think the same can absolutely apply to the type of career you want. So if you are wanting to work with more socially responsible companies, you don't want to start your own thing, because it is a whole journey to be an entrepreneur, right? Like, it is not for everyone. So if you do want to have a sort of standard career, you can absolutely align that with your values in seeking out companies who state that these are their values, in seeking out companies that you would feel comfortable buying from, either as for their services or their products. And I think that in the same way a brand takes a stand and then is able to differentiate themselves from all of the sea of competition doing and selling essentially the same thing, I think that career people who are seeking jobs will absolutely stand out in their cover letters, on their resumes, on their portfolios if they have one, and for sure in their interviews, if they're able to hit on, we have shared values. I care so much about your mission. I am so committed to making this impact alongside you, and here's how I'm going to help. I think they'll just be miles ahead of anyone else with the same skill set or experience or education.
Absolutely. I feel like there's nothing worse than, I think we've all been there, right? We have to start somewhere. I mean, I used to work at a bagel shop. It was my very first job and I was 14 years old. And I mean, that was a good job because I love bagels, but there are always some jobs that you go to and you walk, you just kind of like, I'm wasting my time, right? And I feel like those create these vicious cycles where you have negative energy, you feed that to the people around you, and that's just kind of like what you bring to the world because you feel stuck in this vicious cycle. And sometimes, it might take a bit longer, instead of just taking the first job that you can find, it might take a bit longer to really wait and find that job. But in the long term, that creates those like virtuous cycles. So on the side of like entrepreneurship and really focusing on building that, defining what that audience looks like, I'm curious because we do have a lot of listeners and people in the audience who are both B2B and B2C or one or the other. I'm curious kind of how you differentiate that when building the audience because, obviously they're very different in terms of marketing strategy and growth and communication. How would you kind of build out those two different sides or maybe they're the same in terms of building the audience, but how does that look, kind of that process, or if you have sort of an example to run through?
Yeah, so I think the implementation for B2B versus B2C could be very different, but I approach the brand messaging strategy pretty much the same in that it is all based on mission, values, and audience, and really where all those intersections are. Because if you, the brand and the founder and your team have a really strong sense of what you want to put out into the world and the values that you want to stand for, but it's not resonating with your audience, no matter if they're businesses or consumers, doesn't really matter. You're not going to have that impact if you cannot connect with your audience. So it's really about finding the sweet spot between those three things and hitting on the types of things that your audience cares about the most that will really propel you forward. So, for example, I love that audience. You want to define your audience from the beginning. You want to be fairly niche. You want to have something that's sticky, right? If you just say, I help, SaaS companies do X, Y, or Z, that's not very sticky, right? I mean, at least SaaS is somewhat specific, but really being able to hone in on, I help climate conscious SaaS companies do X, Y, or Z because of this, that's so much stickier. So that as you're sharing that in your social bios, on your website copy, at cocktail parties, in networking groups, the second someone knows of a SaaS company who's climate conscious that needs X, Y, and Z, you are going to be the first person that comes to mind. And that's exactly what you want. And also at the same time, in defining a more specific audience, it also repels people. So that way you're not attracting the SaaS companies who could not care less about the climate, right? Because that's not going to be a good fit for you, and it's not going to be a good fit for them. And even if you could technically do the same deliverable, provide the same service, whatever it is, it won't be aligned because the values aren't aligned. So it's really about creating this ecosystem that works together. And then also with audience, what's really cool is your audience is able to then impact and evolve your business as well. So the more you work with people or businesses, and honestly, businesses at the end of the day are just made up of people. So it's really who is the person on the other end of that business that's making the buying decision. That's your audience. It's not the company that's your audience. It's the specific person who works there that you would be booking with. Whatever C-suite person, whatever marketing person, whatever person that is your audience. It's not the brand itself. But as you work with more and more people, you're able to see, wow, they really care about this. So if, for example, flexibility wasn't one of your original values, but every single client that you come in contact with really values flexible payment schedules or flexible hours or whatever sort of way that flexibility might manifest itself, that might actually be core to your business all of a sudden because you love working with these people and you never thought that flexibility was important, but all of a sudden it is. And in the same way that you might have thought that freedom was important to you in your business, maybe actually you have found a lot of success through systems, and you've actually found some freedom in being a little bit more rigid. So your audience and just your experience can certainly evolve these values, and your audience will evolve over time and your offers will evolve over time, and it all works together. The whole strategy should absolutely be living and breathing.
I think that's an interesting point, and especially nowadays, with COP26 currently going on, while this is being recorded, I think being able to adjust is something that the world needs to kind of do, right? We all need to, every single one of us will need to adjust in one way or another. And so on that line, I think, I'm in marketing as well and kind of in the branding world. And I think sometimes when you do, or when you have you're working with a large client or something, sometimes you can just get so stuck with the plan, right? Of this is what we got to do, just go, 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 go. So kind of when you're working with clients, how are you able to kind of set, maybe there's a process, or how are you able to set in, whatever system it is, to listen and actually take in that and change and adapt when needed? How are you able to kind of set in those, maybe it's a, quarterly analysis, or like, what do you advise your clients to do to make sure they're not just running full speed ahead without actually looking around to see what trends there are, or if they should react or adapt to certain situations?
Yeah. So for me, that's the whole point of having a brand messaging strategy, is because that can then be your compass. That can be your gut check. Because especially, I think we both work with visionary founders, right? So we have all the ideas, and they just want to do the most good and just do the most, period. And so it's really easy to see an opportunity and want to pursue it. And so using that mission, those values, and that audience as your lens, as your perpetual gut check, that helps you avoid shiny object syndrome, and it helps you pivot productively and with intention when it does make sense. So if you have an opportunity to speak at a conference and wasn't on your radar before, but wow, it really checks all my boxes of this would bring me closer to my mission, it would bring me closer to my audience, and or expand my audience in a way that makes sense, and they're super aligned with my values, that's an easy yes. Whereas if you see that your competitor is now offering this product suite and you think, oh yeah, we probably need to jump on that. Well, if you run it through your mission, values, and audience, that might actually be a horrible decision for you. And it would be a total waste of resources and time and money and people power, right? So for me, that's really why the brand messaging is the foundation, so that you're able to navigate changes and ideas more purposefully. And I think it really is a question of keeping yourself in check. And if you can't keep yourself in check, that is where outside perspective comes in. So whether it is a business bestie, a coach, or an outside consultant, it's really this idea of sometimes we are just so close. Our businesses are our babies. It is too hard for us to see the trees all around us, or the forest, or what is the analogy? I think we can't see the forest through the trees, right? Because sometimes it's just so hard for us to zoom out and see the big picture because we're just on to the next thing. And so the way I work with asked, how do you navigate that? So I actually have shifted toward intensive models so that there is more emphasis on taking action and less emphasis on how long can we drag out this process? Like how long can we hem and haw over this? So I work in 1 hour, 1 day, and 90-day increments. And then of course, if someone needs ongoing support, then we can sort of add on from there, mostly in the form of those 1 hour consulting calls. But it's really this idea of let's sit and focus. Let's hash through everything that you need to, or go really deep on this one thing. And then let's come up with actions that'll actually push you forward, because all talk and no action is not pushing anyone forward, and it's not making impact for anyone. So the strategy absolutely needs to be coupled with implementation.
Yeah, I think it's hard because sometimes being an impact founder, where what's driving you is the impact. I think that's kind of a common trend I'm seeing happen, is that we're realizing, money, I think, obviously, finally, 2021, money doesn't give you happiness. Like, yes. But now we're realizing, like, the big driver is really that impact. Like, what is the end of day result? What am I actually changing in the world? Because everything we do does change something, right? And so sometimes you can get stuck in this analysis paralysis of like, it needs to be perfect. I can't be, because there are some times where people have good intentions. They launch these campaigns or whatever, and it blows up in their face. But some of them maybe have not have the best intentions in some examples. But sometimes it's hard to know what the right thing is to say at a certain time. But you're right, in terms of there's that fine line, right, between taking action and actually taking some learnings away, or in making sure you're prepared to get there. So kind of taking that step and then meshing it into kind of more the personal side of things. I'm curious, because I'm sure all of the clients you work with, their personal lives and professional lives definitely mesh if they're doing things with values driven. And I'm sure at home they're trying to do that as well. So I'm curious kind of how you can pull these concepts that you're talking about with like messaging and branding from a professional, business standpoint, and how can we apply this to personal life and help us to more live out our purpose day to day?
Yeah. So I think it again comes back to values and just really living an aligned life. I think also for so many founders, especially solopreneurs or people who are the face of their brand, that line is super thin, especially publicly, but even behind closed doors, you really feel like your business is an extension of yourself. So I do think it's important, though, to keep in mind that your personal values can be different than your brand values. Of course, it should feel good. It should feel aligned, but they don't need to be the exact same. So, for example, we can go back to this idea of freedom, right? Maybe you started your business to have more freedom in your life, financial freedom, spatial freedom, like the ability to live and work wherever you want. Time freedom, the ability to not be accountable to anyone if you need to take care of a chronic illness or take care of a baby or a sick loved one or whatever else, right? And so that might be a personal value to you. And so that is how you will be making decisions in your personal life, whether it's hiring someone to clean your house or hiring a virtual assistant in your business to give you more freedom back. That is a personal decision that may or may not impact your business. But then the ideal of freedom wouldn't necessarily be something that your business is working toward. So it really is a fine line, but I think just constantly being in check with yourself as a founder, as a leader, especially if you have a team, and also if you have a partner or just other people who are close to you, being in alignment with them and making sure that all of your decisions are moving you towards something, because everything we do has consequences, whether it's good or bad, whether we mean it or not. Every single decision we make in every step of our day has some sort of impact. So I think the more intentional, purposeful, and just conscious we can be, the better. It can be a little bit exhausting, but also I think it's totally worth it. And that's sort of like the point of human existence, in my opinion.
I completely agree. I feel like the energy you put into it, when you're doing something you really care about, you get back, So I do think, at the end of the day, it does come out. But I think it's really important to mention that your own personal values don't have to be an exact reflection of your business. Your business doesn't have to be your clone, right? And I think it's really important. I know amazing women founders who have children, and they definitely, they spend a lot of time with their children, but their businesses are amazing and they're always on time. They're doing great work. And just because they might be more flexible in their personal life, or kind of more freedom in that sense, in their business, they're spot on, right? They've got like the people in place to make sure everything is always on point. So I think it's really interesting, and a good way to kind of, I think as well, when we talk about topics of climate and, doing impactful work, sometimes, we're doing it because we need to, right? Because the world is not a perfect place, nor has it ever been, frankly. But, so sometimes there's that flip side of like the negative aspect, like the reason why we're doing it is because there are so many bad things out there. So we have to kind of make sure that we are healthy and we keep our, mental space and our head space in a really good place, and know that, our business and personal lives are not exactly the same. I think that's a really good takeaway. So kind of moving and following with that positive feeling around like, really trying to do something good. So I'm curious, this is a question we always ask because there is so much doom and gloom. I'm curious what you are most excited for the future of our planet.
Yeah, I think there's so much. Honestly, I think we're in this period of a great awakening. I think it's been building for quite a long time, and there have been so many activists for decades, right, who have paved the way. But I really think that this idea of conscious consumerism, climate awareness, climate activism, that sort of thing is reaching a critical mass. For sure with Gen Z, even us millennials, and even sort of beyond on either side of that. I just think that we are finally reaching a critical mass of people who care about impact, people who are willing to ditch the convenience for the future, for the sake of other people. And I think our world is instantly better the second we think of how does this affect other people beyond just myself. So I'm excited for that to continue to grow.
That was a beautiful answer. I love that right away you were like, oh, so many things. I would say most of the times we ask this question, it's like, boof. Let me try to find one. That's great. And so we'll wrap up here kind of around that topic of community. I know you mentioned that, it's exciting. And that's what I always say too. I love like that we're working together, right? Because that combined action will really get us to a good place. So just to wrap up here, I want to wrap up with a question of just community in general. Kind of what would you say is a really critical way that community has helped you on your journey, and how can our community support you moving forward?
Yeah, community has been really important to me as a solopreneur. I didn't realize that this would be so important when I started out on my journey, but there are so many moving parts to running a business, and it is so hard mentally and emotionally, which I did not anticipate. And like just so much mindset stuff comes up, stuff I didn't even know existed bubbles up when you are running and building a business. And so it's just been so wonderful to meet people who care about their impact, care about building business, care about each other. And it's been really nice to commiserate or just see, oh, wow, every single person goes through this exact same doubt or worry or whatever else, no matter what phase of business we are. It's sort of never ending, but also we're constantly getting over that hump and reaching that new peak. before the new valley comes. So community has been really important in that way, just in building a business and not feeling alone. And then in terms of how this community can support me and vice versa, I think it's much the same, bouncing ideas off each other and sharing when someone has a big win or a really great piece of content or anything like that. I think just spreading the word and passing referrals and just raising each other up is so essential and often so overlooked, but it really does make a difference.
Absolutely. The ripple effect, no, that we don't think about. But yeah, once you throw something positive out there, it definitely can go much further than you expect. So, well, wonderful. We will include, links to be able to find you. I know you're in our community and various other communities as well. So we'll include some ways to get in touch with the audience. And we look forward to staying in touch.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon. Brands Saving the World is an original podcast and Ola Impact production. Our host is Kelly Rogan, and we appreciate all feedback and podcast ideas sent to the email hello@olaimpact.com.